This was back in the 80s, before there were any stalking laws whatsoever. And there was a drifter from Scotland, Arthur Jackson.
Number 10, littering.
We should probably get going if we don't want to hit traffic.
Sally, pack up the checkers.
The invention of plastic was followed by the rise of single-use products, which encouraged people to discard. This way, the manufacturers could always sell more. It was around the 1960s that the first littering laws in the US came into being due to the volume of waste produced. All 50 states have some kind of anti-littering law, as do many other countries. People can be fined for littering, though the penalties vary in dollar amount.
Littering! $15 for littering!
This is because it's so expensive for municipal systems to go around and clean up. Programs and organizations like World Cleanup Day and Keep America Beautiful were established to help combat the global issue.
It appears shore leave has been canceled. Pack out your trash.
Number 9, smoking indoors. Once upon a time, it seemed like nearly everybody smoked tobacco.
Hey, you have a light?
But in the 20th century, new research cited tobacco smoking as a leading cause of many cancers. Anti-smoking campaigns encouraged people to quit, which eventually led to widespread bans on smoking indoors in public spaces. In the US, the first smoking bans began in the 1970s.
People who don't want to smoke shouldn't be obliged to smoke someone else's smoke.
Today, most states restrict smoking in workplaces and restaurants. Smoking bans are now so ubiquitous that it's easier to list places that still allow indoor smoking than places that don't. Indoor smoking is allowed with some very stringent loopholes in parts of New York. And it was only in 2020 that an indoor smoking ban went into effect in Japan. Number 8, targeted ads at children. The effects of targeting ads at children were debated for years before something was done about it. The ethical issue was that young kids don't understand the purpose of a commercial and are therefore being exploited to a degree by having ads aimed at them.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
In 1990, Congress brought into effect the Children's Television Act, limiting what kids below the age of 16 could be shown on TV.
Kids imitate what's on TV. So not only are they imitating it, but when they watch it a great deal, that becomes their reality.
And in 2020, YouTube was damned by the FTC for failing to prevent children from being exposed to targeted ads and tracking, which resulted in the company restricting its data collection on those under 13.
In order to help you comply with the law, we're now required to ask you to mark all of your videos as made for kids or not. You know your videos and audience best. So we've launched a new audience setting that lets you tell us if your videos are made for kids or not.
Meanwhile, countries like Norway and the Canadian province of Quebec have completely prohibited commercial advertising to kids. Number 7, substances. There are plenty of illicit substances in the world, and many of them were once legal until their detrimental effects were understood and subsequently criminalized. In 1913, 4 states, California, Maine, Wyoming, and Indiana, banned cannabis.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again.
The following year, a much larger law to control substances was enacted in the hopes of targeting opium use. Before this point, opium dens, where people would buy and use the drug, were commonplace even in the US. The United States also notoriously tried to ban alcohol in the 1920s, though this did not stick.
That people actually thought you could get away with this. That you could actually ban alcohol, completely eliminate its usage in American society.
In 1968, LSD was made illegal, which is ironic considering the CIA spent so much time producing and researching the drug.
After a few minutes, the men found it difficult to obey orders. And soon, the results were chaotic.
Number 6, domestic violence. Horrifically, it took until 1920 for every U.S. state to have a law against domestic violence. And we had to wait for the authorities to start taking it seriously.
What happens when he gets out of jail?
I have to change my identity, my name, my location where I stay.
In the 1970s, additional laws came into place. Before then, even after its criminalization, domestic violence was widely seen as a private matter, and trying to prevent this behavior would have been considered intrusive.
Little things would set him off. She might say a word, and just the inflection of the way she said it may set him off.
Of course, men are not the only perpetrators of domestic violence, and the laws that came into force after widespread campaigning in the 70s help all victims of intimate assaults like this.
One of the ideal situations is that you actually bring a domestic violence advocate out with you on a call for domestic violence so they can, take the person aside.
Number 5, stalking. While it remains a notoriously difficult crime to actually prosecute and/or convict someone of, stalking is, at the very least, a crime in many countries today.
I understand you've recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Stalker alert.
But it's surprising just how recent anti-stalking laws were put into place, with the first American one being passed in 1990 and 7 years later in Britain. Though the UK did criminalize certain phone calls in the 80s.
Rebecca and I were sitting in her trailer and we got a call from the guard saying there's a man here who says he has presents for you.
The US's first law appeared in California in direct response to several cases, including the tragic murder of actress Rebecca Schaeffer. Up until the 1990s, stalking wasn't considered a crime.
This was back in the 80s, before there were any stalking laws whatsoever. And there was a drifter from Scotland, Arthur Jackson.
Stalkers would have to commit something else, like escalate into violent assaults, to actually get arrested and potentially stopped.
They sit on their sofa, they watch television, and the person's character speaks to them.
Number 4, drunk driving. As previously mentioned, the United States has a difficult relationship with alcohol. For over a decade, the National Prohibition Act made it illegal to produce and sell it. So it's not surprising that the U.S. was one of the first countries to criminalize drunk driving in some states at the turn of the 20th century, just as cars were becoming commonplace.
Every year in California, we see about 1,000 people killed by drunk drivers, and over 20,000 are injured.
However, in other parts of the world, this came much later into the 1960s.
Most of us reckon we can handle our motors after a few pints. Take it easy and you don't attract the law. But what if some stupid git does this?
Driving laws are always changing, with 48 U.S. states today banning a new distraction, texting while driving.
Somebody! Help my friend!
Shouldn't you help him? You're right there!
Yes, but I'm angry at him because he was texting and driving.
Number 3, lobotomies. A lobotomy is a now infamous medical procedure whereby connections between the prefrontal cortex and frontal lobe were surgically cut. This was done in an effort to, quote, cure mental conditions that weren't widely understood. Everything from depression to schizophrenia were treated with this procedure after it rose to prominence in the 1930s and 40s.
The idea essentially was to sever the connections between the frontal lobes and the limbic system.
In 1950, the Soviet Union outright banned lobotomies. They realized that it is a nightmarish treatment that ruined the lives of practically everybody who received it, with many not even surviving.
He started to basically drag the age level down and started doing it on teenagers and even young children, people whose brains had not fully developed yet.
In the US, where many lobotomies were performed, the practice is still technically legal in some states, but occurs extremely rarely with a safer procedure. Number 2, child labor. Everybody knows that child labor was once common in the West, perhaps most infamously in Great Britain at the height of the Industrial Revolution. But that doesn't make it any less surprising that people thought it was once a good idea. Children were underpaid and exploited throughout the Western world at this time.
Children were smaller and more nimble, and so therefore could perform functions that would be more difficult for adults. In addition, it was more difficult for children to unionize.
In 1938, the U.S. finally acted and passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which stated the ages and what occupations minors could be employed, as well as regulated the wages and hours of minors.
labor unions and laborers began to clamor for an end to child labor to ensure that the adult working population would have enough jobs.
This law led to increased education and literacy for working-class kids, who previously would have had to work to support themselves and couldn't attend school.
A living is a living!
Some living, Lord help me!
Number 1. Slavery. Though slavery has existed in humanity for thousands of years, it took its most brutal form when European colonizers began the transatlantic slave trade in the 16th century. Various forms of pseudoscience appeared to try and morally justify the unjustifiable.
Why is this one crying?
Separated from her children.
Oh, dear.
Couldn't be helped.
By the 18th century, abolitionist and civil rights movements in America and Europe began to make progress. Through the successful slave rebellion known as the Haitian Revolution, Haiti became the first country to abolish slavery in 1804, with Western powers eventually following suit.
I've heard their groans and their sighs. I've seen their tears, and I would give every last drop of blood in my veins to free them.
Britain and France abolished it in 1833 and 1848, respectively. The U.S. passed the 13th Amendment in 1865, following the Union's victory in the Civil War.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.